Well, people are accusing New York City mayoral candidate Andrew Cuomo of using ChatGPT to help generate his platform. What are the ethics behind that? And other thoughts and considerations? Of course, this is Nuance. I'm Mike Scala, an attorney, and I'm joined by fellow hip hop artist Timid, also known as Jay Carter, the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay? ChatGPT seems to be taking over the world, even the New York City mayor's race.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, when this first came out, like Chat GPT and stuff, and remember, I think we've talked about and speculated how people were going to start using them, especially in campaigns, because it can just generate so much text pretty easily. And so, if this is true, this is definitely something that, maybe we could say we forecast a little bit, but yeah, it's like how far do we go? Like where's the limit on this? So what are they saying as far as Cuomo?
Well, they're referring specifically to his housing plan, which I guess has recently been posted. Now, last week we did take a look at some of the candidates' websites, including Andrew Cuomo's, and we were impressed by the volume of information that was on there on policy, right? We said oftentimes candidates don't give you enough policy. You want more specifics from the candidates. We talked about how the news coverage often wasn't enough about the candidates' plans and proposals. Well, their website had plenty of information, and we were like, "Wow, I can't believe Cuomo had all these PDFs." Right? Was it like 100 pages? I think it was that we saw.
Yeah, it
So
was like 100 pages.
yeah, we were kind of dumbfounded by that, honestly. And we said, well, maybe aides wrote it, right? People on his campaign staff. We doubted whether he sat down and wrote those 100 pages.
Right.
Now there's some question that maybe at least some of it was AI generated. And the reason why this came up in the housing plan in particular was because number one, there was an error. Now I think the error, the typo, right, is more attributable to human error than AI, Chat GPT, because it's just a misspelled word. Instead of objectively with an O, they spelled it with a B. Now, that's not something you would see AI do. That just suggests someone wrote it wrong. The Cuomo
Right.
campaign is saying that it was done with voice dictation, and that's how it got wrong. Even that's kind of weird. How does objectively become objectively? It's
Yeah,
not,
that's not a good excuse.
it looks more like a typo to me. They just typed it in wrong. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think left directly without specific instructions, AI wouldn't make the typo mistake. I mean, you could tell it, okay, misspell a few things to try to, and
Right.
that's one strategy. Misspell a few things, use some incorrect grammar here and there to kind of give a human feel.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd have to specifically say it, and it wouldn't happen just in one specific point. So that does sound to me like human error. And like you said, I agree. It doesn't sound like voice dictation because it wouldn't even be a word. How would you even sound like that?
Right. Right. But the other point that suggested Chat GPT was in one of the footnotes, there was a link, and the link apparently was found by Chat GPT. So I'm not sure if that means it's some kind of uh, suffix or something. You know how sometimes some links have additional information to reveal the source of the link. I'm not sure if
Mm.
Chat GPT links have that kind of information in them or it was revealed in some other way, but this is what's being reported. Maybe we can even find a copy of it and see it ourselves to know exactly what they mean by that. But they're saying that the link somehow reveals that Chat GPT found it.
Okay. Yeah, definitely have to look into that. And I wonder if like, it's gotten better, but in some cases when ChatGPT and other AI would provide links to the articles that they were citing
Mm-hmm.
before, and still happens, sometimes those links were just made up links.
Right.
Or they
Right.
went to nowhere. And so that could be a telltale sign. Like if they posted it on there and this link goes to absolutely nothing or it's not even real, it's like, okay, maybe AI did this.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that before when I was
Yeah.
experimenting with AI, and sometimes you even get encouraged, right, as a lawyer, right, or really anyone doing some kind of research. Maybe you have some kind of hypothesis. Maybe you want something to be true, but you want to verify it, right? And you're like, is this the case? You ask Chat GPT to help you, and its
Right.
source, it'll cite a source, and then you get excited for a second. You're like, oh, I knew it. Yes, perfect. I was looking for this. And then you follow up on it and you're like, oh, no, they just made that up.
Yeah, right, exactly. And we talked about this in a previous episode. There was, remember the lawyer in New York that used ChatGPT to write their brief, and like it just made up cases to cite, and they just went ahead and submitted it, and the judge is like, "Wait a minute. These cases aren't even real. Like, what are you doing?"
Right. The other attorney actually complained and asked the judge to sanction the lawyer, and the lawyer had to explain himself as to why he did that. Obviously, that was his defense. ChatGPT was so new, he
Mhm.
thought that it was giving him legitimate sources. And you would think that, right? I mean, now it's so widespread that it doesn't, or this kind of thing has happened. And now they also give you a disclaimer, if you've noticed on ChatGPT, that sometimes the information is not correct and you better verify it yourself. But when this thing was brand new and everyone was so taken by it and it was doing these amazing things, why would you assume, if you didn't know any better, that it was going to give you bogus information sometimes?
Right. Yeah. And I made a post about that on my LinkedIn as well, just like, breaking down some things that you got to be wary of when using ChatGPT. And one of those things was that it can be confidently wrong, you know.
Right. That's right. Confidently wrong, right? It doesn't even tell you, I'm not
Right,
sure
right.
about this. It's like, yep, this is how it is, buddy. Like, you better believe it. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
so here's the link. I actually found it. The link
okay.
in question on the Cuomo site. It's a link from the Gothamist. And yeah, I was right. You know how sometimes you have a link and then there'll be a question mark and some other information, maybe depending on
Right,
what was generated. It's something
right.
similar here where it has gothamist.com/news/ here's what NYC's mayoral candidates say about freezing the rent. Question mark. Then it has source equals chatgpt.com.
Ah, okay, okay. And that was in the
That was in the document posted to the Cuomo website.
interesting.
Now, the spokesperson for the Cuomo campaign is admitting that they used ChatGPT to research the document, but they're
That was my
denying
next
that.
question.
Yeah, they're denying that ChatGPT wrote it. They're saying A's wrote it, and they're still using this flimsy. We use voice to text, and that's why it came out weird, or there was a typo, or whatever. So they're
Right.
saying ChatGPT did not write it. I guess that's plausible.
Right. And then that was what I was going to ask. Like, because if they're saying source ChatGPT, they could have been using ChatGPT to do the research, because ChatGPT does have access to search the internet. And so if they did that, maybe they were just being transparent and saying, this is the tool that we used instead of going through Google. But I would have said, instead of saying ChatGPT is the source, I would have put the source of wherever the article was from. If it was from the Gothamist, you put source Gothamist, not the tool you use to find the article.
No, that was not something that they intended to write, though. That was
Right.
generated by ChatGPT. So they apparently copied and pasted this link, not realizing or not double checking or really looking too deeply into the URL.
Right. So was it ChatGPT put that in there? Like, look, I want some shine. Everybody's
I think
taking
so.
credit for my work. Like,
I think that's how it appears that when ChatGPT, I mean, we could try it ourselves with ChatGPT now to test that out, right? When ChatGPT gives you a link, does it automatically include source equals chatgpt.com to kind of let people know that's where it's coming from?
that's a good question. Some websites do that. If you
Yeah.
go to like a website, some news sites, if you copy and paste any text off of the article, sometimes when you hit paste, there's like something added onto it and saying that it
All right.
came from this article and whatnot. So that could be
Yeah.
a possibility.
Let's why don't we give it a brief test? You got ChatGPT open, or you want me to try it?
I do have
Okay.
ChatGPT open.
Let's give it a test. So ask
Let's
it
see.
to come up, don't invent articles, obviously, but find, right? Find articles and provide the links. So give it a
Sure.
subject to research. Provide
So
5 articles on this.
right. So I've got um all right. So I've got a an article up. I was having a conversation with ChatGPT earlier over
Mhm.
the tariffs and what's happening on TikTok and China and this and that. So I'm asking, I said, give me some news sources for this point. And so the first one here, they're giving me one from the Financial Times. So
Okay.
I'm just going to copy the text that
Right.
has that on it, and I'm going to paste that and see if anything comes with it. So I'm pasting
So
it into text.
you got the URL from the site.
I got the URL from the site. So I'm doing it several ways. First, I copied just the text with the citation.
Hmm.
Um, this says Financial Times. It so the text copy does not say ChatGPT. It just says Financial Times. However, if you copy the link,
Hmm.
um, it does have an addendum. It has a UTM tag that says
Hmm.
source equals ChatGPT.
There you go. That's what appeared on
Yes.
the Cuomo website. And so, yeah, it's not like they wanted that in there or they put that in there intentionally. They probably didn't realize it was in there, right? They copied and pasted a link from ChatGPT, and that's how they were
Yeah.
busted, essentially. That's how people knew that they were using ChatGPT in some way. Again, this doesn't
Right.
verify that ChatGPT wrote the policy, but it calls
Right.
question what they did, right? Because they were certainly using it, it would seem, to do research, to do something.
Right.
And that's not bad. I
Absolutely.
mean, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Right. It's not the smoking gun.
Yeah,
It,
it's
if people understand how the things work, like if you're not understanding how it works, people can think, oh, well, that means that ChatGPT wrote it. This
yeah,
is a UTM link, which UTM stands for it's tracking, what is it? Urchin tracking module, and it's often used in analytics that's added to the end of a URL, added to the end of an address, so that when you're looking at your analytics, you know where the traffic came from.
right, right.
And
Similar
so
to what I was telling you on the show, I mentioned a while back. You can do that with your Gmail address. You
you
can
can
put
do that. Yeah, you can do that with a lot of different things.
right.
It's
So, for
commonly used.
example, if you're signing up for a subscription service, or let's say you're buying something online and they want your email address, and now you're afraid, well, maybe they're going to sell it to someone else. Someone else might get my data. One thing you could do, and sometimes they check against it by not allowing you to put it, depending on the website. But one thing that you can try is when you put in your email address after the .com, you can put a question mark, and then you can put other information, right? Is that how it goes? So other strings, so that
In some
uh,
cases, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I'll look it up again to get the exact framework of it. But the idea is like, let's say you're putting, I don't know, your email address at gmail.com question mark Footlocker because you're buying shoes from Footlocker. Then later on, if you start getting spam mail from someone else and you see it addressed to that same address with the question mark Footlocker, then you know that's how it originated, right? Footlocker gave up your
Right.
data or there was a breach or whatever, but you know how they got your email address because you're adding additional information to your email address, like you said, that is for analytic purposes. It helps you trace where the traffic is coming from.
Right. And some people also suggest you could just put the site's name in as your name, and then you know when it comes into your email address who sold
Right?
your
This
information.
says, yeah, dear Footlocker.
Yeah. Um, so so yeah, this is not an indictment of, whether, that says that Cuomo's team used it to write it, but it seems like they at least used ChatGPT to do the research.
At least, right? And it could be more. They could have used
Sure.
ChatGPT to do some of the drafting or editing or whatever. They're not
Sure.
copping to that yet, but now people have those questions. And I guess we have to ask, what are the ethics of that, right? Should we just
Of which
expect
part?
not to do research, but to actually use ChatGPT to draft language?
Yeah, and I think that's the big question everywhere now, right? Not just for campaigns, but for um, writing articles, for writing website content. I guess it can depend on the situation. I think for website content and landing pages, if you want to get like a copywritten feel, I think it's less of an issue than if you're thinking about the platform from a politician a candidate. and you want their specific point of view. But then in that case, under normal practice, the candidate's not
Mhm.
always writing the platform themselves. They give it to an intern to do
Right.
the writing, or someone on staff that's a professional writer to write this. So
Yeah. Same
what's
thing
your
with the
what's your
lawyer,
feeling?
right? Same thing
You're
with
a
the lawyer.
lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So that so and in that case, yeah, give it to a lawyer so that the language can be as such that, that maybe it protects them from saying certain things or makes sure that certain things are clearer under the law. And in those cases,
Well,
we don't really criticize the candidate for that.
no, I was talking about sometimes lawyers will have others write the language for them.
Sure,
And
sure.
is it the same thing as using ChatGPT to draft certain things? I mean, obviously you have the issue of making sure that it's correct, and that is really on the
Right,
person to verify the information, make sure that it's not giving you bogus case law or saying things that aren't true.
right,
Like you have to independently verify everything, and now ChatGPT has that disclaimer. Make sure that you're verifying because sometimes it's not accurate. So
right.
that is certainly the case. But just aside from that, right? What are the ethical considerations when it comes to using AI to draft language? I mean, as a politician, I mean, because we can talk about the ethics of being a lawyer, we're talking about the politics of running for
Right.
office. So, should you as a voter have second thoughts on that? Should you be hesitant to support a candidate or a campaign that's using AI to generate their policy? Does that suggest that they're taking a shortcut in some way, that they don't care about the issue as much, that they're trying to deceive you somehow? You know what I mean? Does it
Right.
suggest something about the campaign that would be a strike against them somehow?
And I think even within that, there are still some other questions. Like you say, if they're using AI to draft their policy, that could be taken a few different ways. Are they using AI to create the policy, come up with the idea to and
Right,
then write it out, or
right.
are they giving the AI guidance and say, this is what my policy, I want my policy is. Can you draft the write-up about it?
Yeah, yeah.
So that it's coherent, so that it communicates the message the way I want it communicated. You know, I think there are a couple of different ways it can be
Sure,
looked at.
sure. The funny thing is when you're as well known as Cuomo, for example, his record is out there, right? I mean,
Right.
you don't know how deep AI is going to go, but if you really were to dig deep, you could find his positions on all of these topics probably
Right.
already. And you don't even have to feed it much. You can say, I'm Andrew Cuomo, write me policy on housing that's consistent with the way I've behaved in public service on that
Right.
issue for the past 30 years. You know what I mean?
Right.
You
And
might get a whole
and
platform out of it.
and at that point, you could also to make it a little bit more accurate, you could provide supporting um documentation or articles. Like, give it like 4 or 5 different articles where Cuomo has talked about this in the past
Mm-hmm.
and be like, this has been consistently my vision. You can look at this as supporting evidence, also do some research on the internet, and then come up with the language.
Right. So
So,
really quickly on this, I just Googled, it's the Gmail plus trick, not the question mark, because we saw the
right,
question mark in the URL on the
right.
Cuomo site, right? That, would you call that? That was like a very trivia night term. The urchin, what was it called? Would you call that?
It was the urchin tracking module.
The UTM, the urchin tracking module. That sounds like something you got to go to the clinic for. Uh, okay, urchin. Yeah, so that's a little bit different, but in the same kind of vein as the Gmail plus. So not the question mark, it's the plus trick, and it's not after gmail.com. So if you want to try it out, what they're saying here is if you have a username, right? So Mike G Scala at gmail.com. Instead of writing the Mike G Scala at gmail.com, I could put Mike G Scala plus, right? The plus sign, and then put a string of whatever I want after it, like Mike
Mm,
G Scala plus banking at gmail.com, Mike G Scala plus shopping at gmail.com, or put a specific store or website in there.
right,
And the idea is it doesn't matter what you write after the plus sign, it's still going to go to that username, right? It's still going to go to your correct email. And so that's one way of tracking. If I later were to get an email and I don't know where it's coming from, I know it's some kind of spammy thing, or they're trying to sell me something, whatever, but it was addressed to Mike G Scala plus Footlocker or whatever it was at gmail.com, I'll know that's how it originated. So yeah, that's the idea. I believe I've tried this before on some sites and got an error saying that's not a valid email address. So I think in some cases they're coding to prevent against it because they know that you're trying to do that.
Okay, okay, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that way you would know like who's selling my info.
Right. But it
Yeah.
should still work generally. You could test it out yourself, send yourself a test email using that,
Right.
right, that formula. And it's also a way that you could sort emails if you want. I mean, there are other ways, obviously, to
Sure.
sort your inbox, but like if you wanted to have, basically sub email addresses within your own email, just as a way to internally sort the information, like your name plus friends, your name plus family, whatever. This way you can search for that and you can categorize those emails that come into that particular iteration of your email address. So one thing that you could do to I guess to keep yourself organized in that way.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. There's also another a pro tip you can use throwaway email addresses that not your main email address. Set up a secondary one that's specifically for these types of things.
Right.
So in case they do start spamming or sending it around, it goes to that box that you don't even look
Yeah.
at beyond the first email anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Or imagine you just put spam after the plus sign, Mike G Scala plus spam at gmail.com, and then set up your Gmail to automatically block any emails that are addressed to Mike G Scala plus spam at gmail.com.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So.
So, yeah.
At least on this point, we don't know specifically whether or not they let AI write the whole platform, but the question is, should they have to let people know if
Right.
they use
Right. Should
AI?
they have to disclose it? I think we kind of touched on the subject in the past as well when AI was first becoming more prominent, but
Hmm.
it's certainly relevant again now. And I guess also a follow up question would be to what extent should they have to disclose,
Right.
right? Because they're probably, I mean, who isn't using AI to do research? Even when you Google things now, you get the Google AI pop up.
Exactly. At the very,
I
even
mean,
if you don't want it, it's
even if you
it's
don't
like
want AI, you're getting it, you know? So,
right. It's in the results at the very top now. Like it's
right.
like
And by the
uh,
way, it's given me bad information as recently as yesterday. I was trying to figure out uh, certain information about Westchester County because I'm not as familiar, but I got some work there now. And so I was Googling some things. And like you said, confidently wrong. You ask it a question and it's like, yes, this is true. And it's even gives you names of things. And you're like, oh, wow, it looks like it knows what it's talking about. But then you actually look further into it and you realize, no, it just made it up. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. It even named things that don't exist.
yeah, that's always the issue. So what needs to happen, and these aids for Cuomo, even if they use it for research or anyone's using for draft, is you've got to verify. You've got to go through s- each thing that's written and make sure it's correct and edit it.
But you realize when we say that Google now will give you AI when you search, whether you want it or not. And
Uh,
oftentimes what it gives you is wrong. So that's a problem, right? That's really a problem because if you're using ChatGPT, let's say, or some other AI based platform to do research, and now you're trying to verify that research on, let's say, Google comes in with its own AI, which also is wrong. And you're in this endless loop of AI telling you things that aren't true. Because let's be honest, a lot of people, probably most people nowadays, do their research by Googling. That's the first thing they do.
right. So yeah, verification will have to come in the form of looking at articles, looking at verifiable sources. And even in those cases, sometimes those articles could be written by
What if those
AI.
articles are written by AI? make sure
We're
it
just
doesn't
so
say
screwed.
make sure it doesn't say question mark source equals chat GPT on the article.
Right, right. Yeah. So, um, yeah, you got to look for, you're gonna have to look for, multiple sources. And I think it's gonna be more and more important going forward to check multiple sources
Right. Right.
with everything, not just with written articles, but even with images and video to make sure that what we're seeing and what's being presented is consistent across the board with reputable sources.
Yeah, yeah. And that is difficult. I mean, like I said, I was trying to do some research yesterday. AI was giving me all wrong information. And then you try to go further down the rabbit hole, try to look at other things, but you start questioning everything then. And it's hard to
Right,
find the information that you really need. And like we said, weed out the good from the bad. Like it does make things
right.
more difficult. So did you see this? I don't know. It's kind of an aside, but it was going around the internet, this meme where a professor supposedly got an email from one of his students asking about ancient sources because he was writing a research paper or whatever, and he was like, I just want to know the rules, the ground rules for which sources I'm allowed to cite. He was like, I found some ancient sources from the late 1900s. Are those acceptable? And it was a link from like 1998 or something like that. And the professor was like, he's like, I'm dead. I feel so old now. Like I can't, like this is crazy because as a college kid saying the late 1900s and it's an ancient source. And then some people were saying, well, yeah, if it's more than 20 years old, it is considered ancient in academia or whatever. But it was a combination of the word ancient and the late 1900s, I think, that did it.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that. There's been variations of that where people are talking about maybe they're asking their kids or they're talking to
Mhm.
some younger folks and yeah, they reference the 1900s. It's like it just sounds so long ago.
Right, right. Because
And
we
then
live
you
outside.
realize it was like 25 years ago. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, well, more than that, right? And then you see things like, like the distance between what is it, like the 20s, the 1920s and the 1950s. I think that's what, like the 40s and the 80s or something like that is basically like between the 80s and what we are now. Something like that.
right.
It's
It's
like,
crazy.
yeah, you start looking at that perspective, it gets even crazier. But
Yeah.
I think for those of us who grew up in the so-called 1900s, right? The difference is we defined time by decade. So we would talk about the 90s, the 80s,
Right.
70s, right? But we never looked at the 1900s as its own monolithic century. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was a decade. But post 2000, the decades have seemed to lack the character that the decades had in the 1900s. Have you noticed that?
Um, yeah, kind of like now that you're saying it, I'm thinking about it. Like when you think about the 70s, you get a specific image. You think about
Right.
the 80s, there's a specific
The
image.
style, right?
Same
Yeah,
with the
exactly, right. What
90s.
do people's houses look like with the lava lamps or the couches, the gaudy decorations, the colors of the carpets and the wallpaper and that kind of stuff? You can kind of
Yeah,
even the clothes, the fashion, right? The music. You can think about like 70s music versus 80s music versus the sound was different. I think a lot
very
of it
different.
maybe had to do with also technology improving. And so some of it, became more cleaner or clearer, maybe
But
less
even the
analog.
60s and the 50s,
Right, right.
there's definitely a difference. I I can't think of any differences like that in at least any big differences between the tens and
Yeah.
the aughts.
Right. Right.
Um,
Even saying the word aughts makes you feel a little bit silly, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. It's weird, right? Or even now, the 20s, right? We're in the 20s right now.
Right. Right.
I don't,
Is there really much of a difference culturally? I mean, there are subtle things, sure, political,
right,
right. But as yeah, like we said, as far as the overall sound and the style and the look and the feel, if you showed, I don't know, yeah, like show someone a picture from 2015 and a picture from 2023, can they automatically tell the difference in terms of what they're wearing or the style of, like we said, how
right,
people decorate their apartments or their houses, that kind
right,
of thing,
right.
right? But do the same thing between the 70s and 80s and 80s and 90s, and you probably can't tell the hairstyles even.
Yeah, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
that's
That's
part of, I think, why. I mean, part of it is just getting older. I think they say time speeds up as you get older, but I think part of it is that we don't have these distinct feels anymore amongst the decades. And so the 80s felt like a whole era. The 90s felt like a whole era. Whereas 2000 to 2025, even though it's a quarter of a century, kind of feels like a couple of years. It's weird.
it could be, yeah, it could be. So interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got off on an aside there, but I think we wanted to ask more about maybe Chat GPT can help with this topic too. AI. And as it relates to campaigns and candidates, right? We started to pose the question, should candidates have to disclose their use of AI? And we'll make that the poll question of the week. But there is a lot of nuance to be found here because you do have
Absolutely.
to ask yourself, use how? Like we said, research. Well, you can't avoid AI being a part of your research anymore. So is that going to be the standard? Because if that's the standard, then every campaign is going to have to say we used AI to perform some of our research, right? So
Right.
maybe that's not the standard. Maybe it's got to be more than that. Maybe it's drafting. Is it going to be editing? I mean, do people want that to be it? What if you draft it yourself or your campaign does it yourself, but you have AI look it over, proofread it, make some changes, right? Make it look nicer. Should that be
Right.
disclosed?
Check the grammar, check
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
punctuation.
And then we have to ask ourselves why? Why do we want, if we do want these disclosures made, what purpose are we hoping that it'll serve? Is it just a matter of transparency? But again, why? Why do we want that particular form of transparency? Do we not trust the information as much if we know it's AI generated? I mean, what is the reason why it should be disclosed?
Right. Yeah.
So let's put it out to the people. The poll question of the week is, should candidates have to disclose their use of AI? And of course, if you participate on this poll, you can give your thoughts, comment, right? What are the parameters in your opinion? Where should we draw those lines if we should? Or should that be up to the campaign? Should they not have to disclose if they don't want to?
Right. Absolutely. It's gonna be interesting to see. Um, well, speaking of polls, we had a poll last week.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and get into the results here. So the poll last week, after we went through the various campaign sites and their platforms and their proposals, and so we asked, do you perform your own independent research on candidates' policy proposals before voting? To see what people do. Do they just rely on media? Do they
Right.
go on deep dives themselves? Because as we saw, there can be a wealth of information out there, and it's are people doing their due diligence and tapping into it. So, uh, there's a small number of respondents, but 100% said yes, they do their own research,
Wow.
which I find a little bit, I'm not sure.
Here's here's the thing. It kind of relates to our discussion earlier about AI. Basically, you can't avoid it even if you want to. I think it's a similar type of thing. People may think they're doing their own independent research, but where are they getting the information from? If they're looking at certain media outlets, is that truly doing their own research or are they just
Right.
consuming what's being fed to them by those outlets?
Right. So some of the comments here are kind of interesting. Um, the first comment here says, knowing what policies national politicians suggest is different than them supporting good policy. Finding any information on county and municipal candidates is dang near impossible. News articles don't cover policy positions for county races, and many local candidates don't have a website at all. For nonpartisan offices, at best, you might know what organization is backing a slate if there is a slate in play. What do you think about that?
I mean, that's largely correct. I've noticed that people running for local offices often don't even talk about their policy. And sometimes when they do, they get criticized because people say, oh, you're just running for town council or whatever. You think you can be king? You think you're going to be the mayor? Like, how are you going to have power?
Cynical view of it.
Say what?
A cynical view of positions. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're
Well,
largely ceremonial, buddy.
you have, well, kind of like you have all these grand ideas that how you're going to change the world, but you're in a pretty small local seat. Who do you think you are that you're going to be able to enact all these things?
Right.
So, and there could be some truth to that type of criticism, but hopefully, as a candidate, you are putting out ideas that are within the jurisdiction of the seat that you're running for. I mean, you can go beyond that
Right.
a little bit if you want, right? And you say, well, I'll advocate, I'll use my platform to lobby the governor or whatever. You can say some of that, but your focus, I think, should normally be on what you want to achieve directly in that office, right? What that office can do. in terms of the votes that you have, the power that you have in that seat. So I do want, like we said last week, I do want to see more of it from candidates generally. I don't think we usually get enough of it. And certainly the local coverage doesn't give us enough of it, right? Like we did
Right.
last week, the mayor's race. And you would think the New York City mayor's race would be kind of close to a national kind of seat. Obviously, it's a municipal seat, but it's not like you're running for mayor of some town in Nebraska or Kansas. This is the mayor of New York City. It's the biggest city in the whole US. And so while it is
Right.
technically a local seat, it's as big of a local seat as you're ever going to find. So,
Right.
all right, we know Eric Adams certainly took that and ran. He was mayor of New York and still is, and he's used it to go on all the talk shows and go to the White House. And not saying you shouldn't go to the White House as mayor, but really taking advantage of the spotlight that gives you, and it does give you an enormous spotlight being mayor of the biggest city in the country. So,
Absolutely.
so with that said, why is it that we had to dig into the candidates' websites to get a sense of their policy, especially as it related to the candidates who were kind of getting lost in the mix, right? Because we did say, okay, when it came to Mamdani's campaign, you did see some more coverage on his ideas. And he was proposing more radical or bolder, ambitious plans or whatever. And Cuomo, okay, you got a little bit of that as the more established figure who was the governor, and he's coming in saying we want to hire more police, and some of these big things he's talking about. You hear those. You don't
Right.
hear about the differences between Scott Stringer and Brad Lander's housing policy, for example.
Right. Right.
Right? How are these candidates really different from each other on the issues? You're not getting that. Maybe that's not considered as exciting to talk about. Maybe the people don't want to hear that as much, although our poll suggested that people do want more policy. So even
Right.
for a seat as big as this, you're not getting coverage on issues.
Right. I think like in Mamdani's case, outside candidates may not have the visibility and the track record, so they may have to lead with policy versus someone like a Cuomo who can lead with the cult of personality type of movement.
Record,
Because it's
experience, name recognition. Yeah,
right, right. So you have to come with, okay, this is my substance
right,
versus, hey,
right.
hi, I'm here again,
And that's always what kind of irked me about local elections here in New York City. I remember people running for whether it's city council or assembly or state senate. Sometimes you get a crowded field. Let's say a seat opens up, right? A bunch of people coming in. Sometimes they're well-known elected officials from the area. This one, I've been in office for this many years, but if you're trying to decide which one to support, you're not getting information on how they differ policy wise. What you're getting is, I've served this area for the past 15 years. I've set this up. I've worked with these people. I got this union support. Someone else might come out and say, I like that candidate because they helped me when I was having a problem or that kind of thing. But you're not getting, okay, when it comes down to it, how are you different policy wise? Would your votes be any different in the legislature? Would you be prioritizing different legislation? You're not getting a sense of that at all, really, at the local
mm,
level. I think you should, but then again, maybe I'm somewhat of an anomaly that way. Maybe I want that information more than most voters do, because you would think that if the voters demanded it, the candidates would have to respond to it.
right. Another comment here on this question of if you perform your own independent research on candidate policy proposals. One person said, of course, but so what? Elections are not decided on policies.
Okay, well then why is he doing or is she doing the research? Does does
Maybe this is
that
personal for
maybe they
themselves.
maybe they care, but they are cynical
Right.
also, and they think that most voters don't.
Right. And I think there's truth to that. We've talked about how the sensational or the flash, I think what was the phrase that you used it before? The steak and not the sizzle or something like
Mm,
that.
yeah,
How more the sizzle is being covered or being looked at by people instead of the meat of what it is. And I think there's reason to be cynical on that.
yeah, and it makes sense from a media perspective, right? Of course, the media is going to favor the sizzle over the steak. I mean, that's almost self-explanatory.
Right. Yeah. Um, and let's see. Now, here's another. another response here, and this to me seems like it's the other side of that
Mm.
question. This person says, I vote for Democrats and against Republicans, period. Knowing which party a politician chooses to run under tells me more about them than anything else ever will. In a Democratic primary, I might do some policy research. So I
Yeah,
think we see a lot of that with people who just vote along party lines, regardless of their
right.
platform or their policies.
Yeah, yeah, and there is truth, right, to the idea that in a general election, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's probably going to tell you something that you should probably still do your research because just because they have a certain party label, it doesn't mean that their policy is going to be what you might expect.
Right.
But that does at least give you more information about their political brand, right, or the lane that they might occupy. In a primary, though, and let's be honest, in a place like New York City, it usually comes down to the primary. Right? The New York City mayor's race is almost certainly going to be decided by the Democratic primary. That's just how it is here. So that's the kind of dynamic that we have. We have to choose the best candidate in the primary. Well, how do we do that if they all have a D next to their name, or if you're going to vote in the Republican primary, all they are next to their name? How do you determine which one of these of this party you're going to vote for? And unfortunately, other factors do tend to influence this more than policy. For example, in New York City and other places as well, but people might be surprised to hear it's such a big thing in New York City. Demographics tend to play a very big role, right? People like to vote for candidates from their communities demographically, right? There's a joke that in Italian neighborhoods, they look for the vowel, person ending in the vowel, ask you their candidate. If it's a Hispanic neighborhood, oftentimes a Hispanic candidate will get the most votes. Same with Black neighborhoods, same with just about any Asian, any demographic really you look at in the city. It's not always the case, and sometimes people will vote for other reasons as well. But one major factor that you cannot deny is that, right? And so that's one way people sometimes will choose or be partial to a candidate in a primary.
Right. And it's in this response here saying that, knowing which party a politician chooses tells them more about everything. It it begs the question is that our parties these days and their platforms is it so divided and so different that it's actually reasonable and prudent to just vote party lines because you know it's going to be in line with what you believe in. There's not a lot of nuance in the different
Well,
candidates within the party, within the different parties. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, I think you should always do research. But here's the thing: once the general election is set, right, and you've got the two candidates, it does depend on the level of seat, right? If it's a very local position, or if it's something like the mayor of New York City or the governor of New York State, if it's a bigger, kind of more publicized kind of seat, you're probably going to see the candidates say something as the nominees that let you know where they stand generally, right? They're going to be echoing some kind of talking point that you've heard before or take some kind of side that you're familiar with, right? So you're going to get a sense of that. If you don't get any sense of anything, let's say, like we said, it's a very local seat, town council somewhere or something, and you're not seeing anything on the news about it, and you never maybe you go to vote for governor one year and you go down the ballot and there are these local races and you don't even know these candidates at the local level, but you see a Democrat and a Republican. All things being equal, yeah, you're probably going to vote for the candidate representing the party that you feel most aligns with you or that you're trying to support in this election. And I think that's reasonable if you're in that seat, if you're in that position. But with that said, you probably shouldn't allow yourself to be in that position. You should probably still do some research before going to vote in the first place.
Right. No, I agree. I think regardless, even with the division, you still should know about the candidates that you're voting for.
Yeah.
Even if it's not going to change the way you're voting, you still might want to know who you got on your ticket. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. And, you know, people have different principles as they should. Right. And so just because you might think you want to support this party over that one, okay, fine. Is there anything that's a deal breaker for you? Right. What if a candidate who represents your party of choice has some issue that they support that you find completely repulsive and you don't want to support. Do
Right.
you think the priority is just getting a Democrat or getting a Republican into that seat? Is it a matter of getting the numbers? Like if it's like, let's say, a congressional seat, you just want to make sure that more people from your party win to get the majority, right? Well, that's one consideration you may have. What if it's something like a board that is almost all the same party, and so one more person from that party getting on the board isn't going to change the way that that board as a whole can vote or act. Maybe then your principles start coming into play more when it comes to some of these other things, right? Like, yeah, like I normally vote for this party, but I find this candidate so reprehensible based on what they believe in, or maybe even something in their past or whatever, right? That I'm just going to take that stand and abstain from voting for them. Maybe you write someone in, or you vote third party, or you vote for the other person in that particular case, right? That's something I think you look at a case by case basis, right? Maybe the party consideration outweighs the others, but I think it depends on the seat and the person and what it is. I think you have to look at it and make that choice.
Yeah, I agree. I think, but at the same time, you know, right now, Democrat and Republicans are so far apart. Um, is it
Well,
even necessary at this point to look into their policy? I think you should, but is it really necessary? They're so far apart.
are they? Are are the
Yeah, I think
mainstream
they are.
parties are the mainstream parties so far apart, or is the division more in terms of the fringes that you see amplified on social media?
I think both things are true, right? The fringes def absolutely are getting the most. But then there's the not just the fringes, but the leaders of the party. And I'm thinking more specifically now in the Republicans, and you're seeing the Marjorie Taylor Greens, and you're seeing, the Boberts and this, and they I would say I don't know if they're the fringes, they're kind of fringes of the Republican Party,
Yeah.
but they still support and strongly come out for the meat of the party, which is the current administration, which has some serious violations against the country and the way of life that we've been living. And so, is it really necessary to dig into candidates who support that or on the same ticket as that and just say, you know what, I want no part of that. I'm going the other way.
Well, you don't have to have a part of it, though. I mean, so you're talking about Congress, and that's what I'm saying. Maybe the balance of power in Congress is the most important consideration here in that
Mm,
particular type of election. What if it's a state legislative seat? What if it's a local seat? What if it's city council? What if it's town council somewhere? Again,
right.
you don't have to support the other brand if you find that brand to be so reprehensive and contrary to
That's
your
what I'm
beliefs. But it doesn't mean you have to support the other party either in that particular seat. What if it's
right. No,
said somewhat inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, right? Like it's an area where Democrats are going to control or Republicans are going to control regardless. And so your vote here, or even who wins this seat, isn't going to have any impact on the local laws, let's say, or the policy in your area because of the
right.
makeup politically of the area. In a
Right.
case like that, and again, this is a case by case choice as a voter. You have to make it
Sure.
yourself. But I think it's valid to start asking the question like, am I going to write someone in? Am I going to vote third party? Am I not going to vote for that office? Some people might think you should
Right.
vote for everything, but there are people who leave certain contests blank on their ballot. They'll show up just to vote for president or whatever, and they just leave everything else blank. A lot of people do that. So
Sure.
that's
And
not
they're
something that I encourage people to do, and a lot of people get annoyed at that. And they're like, "Hey, your local politicians affect your quality of life a lot more than the ones on top." But it is a choice some people make, and it is their right to make that choice to vote how they see fit.
absolutely. And to be fair, there will be people within, candidates, especially some running at local levels, community levels, that may not identify with the bigger parts of the party that you can find reprehensible, and they could be really focused on the local community in the way that they're supposed to be. and the differentiation between their opposition, regardless of the party, Democrat, Independent, whatever it is
Mhm.
they are, um, and that shadow of the the large part that you detest could be weighing heavy on what they're actually looking to do.
Sure.
So there could be some, for example, there could be some Republican local candidates who don't don't align with that part and are really looking to be maybe fiscally conservative, more traditionally conservative about this area to try to move things forward for the community. So in that case,
Yeah.
you
Well,
still do need research.
listen, there is a big divide in the Democratic Party now
Sure.
where a lot of people who I guess tend to vote Democratic will refuse to vote for even Democratic nominees who don't pass their purity tests, right? Who
Sure.
don't check every single box, or maybe certain boxes. Maybe they have certain things that they say, listen, I'm not going to budge on this one. You might agree with me on 98% of the things, but these 2% here, this is the deal breaker. And then you have people who are much more pragmatic who say, even at the high levels, like president or Congress, let's say, that you should vote for the Democratic nominee, regardless of who it is, because it affects the balance of power in the country, in your state,
Right.
etc. So I think that's a philosophical divide. It's also, I think, a big part of the reason why Democrats have been losing a lot lately, because not enough. I mean, if you look at the other side, they're more on board with the program. They, even if they disagreed
Right.
initially, they get on board by November,
They
right?
don't have that purity test as much. They don't have to
Yeah,
be perfect.
they're just trying to win to gain power because they
Right.
think that's going to advance what they believe in more.
Right.
Whereas with the Democrats, you do see that. You do see if the even the presidential nominee is in, to their liking, a lot of them will either vote third party, stay home, sometimes even troll vote for Republicans. They do that. And that has been a problem electorally, I think, for the
Right.
Democrats because of that divide. But you're seeing that even at high level. So it isn't just a matter of local seats here. It's even when it comes
Right.
to people running for president. Ironically, maybe people running for these lower seats may not have that working against them as much because maybe people aren't aware of it as much. Maybe if they aren't as
Mhm.
well known and all of their moves aren't so publicized, then the purity test won't affect them as much because people will be going to vote and they'll be like, well, I want the Democrat. I don't know much about that guy or whatever, but I want the Democrat, as opposed to hearing all these crazy things about Kamala or Hillary or whatever.
Right, right. It kind of, it's not exactly the same, but kind of makes me think of, this idea of the separations between different levels of the seats and in the party. In this last election with AOC, and she won her seat. Um, you know, she won her seat again, but at the same time, a lot of her voters voted for Trump, which was kind of reported in the news. It's like, how are they so much for this very progressive Democrat? They voted her back into her seat, but then on the presidential level, they voted for the opposite party and the opposing candidate, who would seem to be very much opposite of her um, viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
But they kind of their votes kind of split in that way.
Well, why do you think that is? Do you think that's a matter of voters not voting based on policy primarily, or what, protest voting? Or what do you think that is?
I think there are a lot of factors to that. To me, I mean, she's representative of the Bronx, which is a heavily Latino area. And
Well, keep
she's
in mind that when she first won the seat, she lost the Hispanic vote. She won with the white progressives who moved in.
right.
Now she probably does enjoy the Hispanic vote because she's been in office for a few years.
And I think part of that played into this here, because we saw that a lot of the Hispanic vote, there was a significant increase in Hispanic vote that went to Trump. But she is Hispanic in a Hispanic area, so I think she got some of that for her local area.
Well, that's what I
Um,
said before about demographics playing a big role, right? Sometimes
right.
demographics trump the policy.
Right. So I think that played a role. I'm not saying that that's the specific reason, but I think that probably played a role in it.
Right, right. Or is
So
it a matter of people paying more attention to policy at the national level than even at the congressional level?
I don't know. I don't know. I think, I mean, she's been in office in that place for quite a while now, so maybe they're just happy with the performance in that area. But at the same time, they
I
like some of
mean,
the policy.
honestly, people read into these things too. That wasn't a competitive seat, so that doesn't even really matter. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of interesting to look at, like, oh, look at the Trump votes versus a Democrat down ballot versus Republican. They split the ticket there, but it wasn't a competitive race, so
Mm,
there was no Republican who was ever going to win that seat. It's one of the most democratic seats in the country, and so
right.
they probably didn't have a lot of money to spend, and it just wasn't. It was a joke. It wasn't a real race. You know what I mean? So often people also vote for the person that's going to win too. They vote just for the front runner, or if they don't even
Some
know them.
people do that as well.
You
Absolutely.
know, in a local race, especially if you've only seen one of the names, you never saw the other name before. Oftentimes,
Right.
you can vote for the name that you know. That you know,
Right.
and so again, that's not a policy
Yeah.
consideration. It's also not a matter of people doing their own independent research. And I think this speaks to why money matters as much as it does, why resources matter as much as they do in politics, because
Right.
it falls on the campaigns to do that heavy lifting. You know, if in a perfect world, in a utopian society we envision, every voter went out and did a ton of independent research on all the candidates and then went to vote, the campaigns wouldn't have the burden, or at least not as much burden, of proactively getting their messaging out and proactively trying to encourage people to go out to the polls. You know, maybe they might put out some negative stuff about the other candidate because the other candidate is not giving you that side of the story, but all these resources are spent on educating the public that there's even an election coming up, that you're the
Right.
candidate, this is what you stand for, this is what, whatever it is we want you to think or know about us, and that you should vote for us. And then they call it GOTV, get out the vote. Money is spent trying to rally your own supporters to vote. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday, or get your absentee ballot
Sure.
in, or whatever it is, right? We'll give you a ride if you need to, right? All that kind of stuff, because the campaigns have to do that work, because the voters aren't doing it as much maybe as we would want, right? Like we said, if they were all doing, if all the voters automatically read up and really dove deep into all these candidates, then not as much money, not as many resources would need to be spent on doing
Right.
that heavy lifting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's
So,
name recognition. That goes back to Cuomo being right. We said that from the beginning, why he has such a commanding lead from the beginning.
that definitely helps.
Recognition
I think
plays a
that
big,
also,
yeah, plays a big
it
role.
also, yeah, it also plays into the incumbent factor as well.
Right.
All of that. Yeah.
Right. Well,
So,
there you go. Talking about this particular congressional seat, the power of the incumbency. Right.
sure, sure. Absolutely. So interesting results here. It'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see what we hear about the results next week as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. We're going to wrap up here. We did want to touch on the fact that the budget in New York State is overdue. We know it was due on April 1st, so we're 2 weeks late now. As of today, we're told that a deal has been reached. It seems like we may be getting a final budget soon. It was discovery reform that was holding up the budget, and there's a lot that really goes into this. So we're not going to have time to go too deeply into it right now, but the district attorneys across the state have been arguing with criminal justice reform advocates, right? And I guess defense attorneys and folks like that, about changes that need to be made to the state's discovery laws, and whether cases should be dismissed automatically when all of these discovery is not produced, right? So when you have a criminal trial and you're trying to exchange evidence, right, before the trial, both parties, both sides have a right to look at the evidence that will be presented by the other side. In that phase, they call that discovery. What if the defense requests something that the prosecution doesn't hand over? And what if it's essentially a technicality? In other words, whatever document maybe was missing wasn't the difference maker in the case and provided no prejudice to the other side, right? It wasn't going to be the reason someone was going to win or lose. It was basically minor in the scheme of things. Well, should that be enough to warrant dismissal, or should there be some other standard, right? And there are different standards that are being thrown around. Like we said, prejudice to the sides is one. Some people think that's too much of a standard. There's the due diligence factor, which is, well, if they did their best to produce the documents, that should be good enough. As opposed to intentionally withholding something, right? And then you have, for example, Queens DA Melinda Katz talking about the judge has to look at the discovery on the whole. In other words, look at all of the evidence as opposed to focusing on one document, right? That she doesn't want the judge saying, well, because this one page of 1,000-page PDF is missing, the case has to be dismissed. She wants it to be more holistic approach. What does the evidence on the whole say? Is enough evidence missing to warrant dismissal, or is that relatively minor? So, like we said, this gets kind of technical and people are fighting over the language and what the standard should be, but it seems like we have some kind of compromise reached now, according to the Speaker of the Assembly, such that a deal is forthcoming and we should hopefully have our budget soon.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Oh.
All right.
All right.
So
Well,
what's the bottom line here?
yeah, what is the bottom line? We started off by talking about AI and the need to do your own research. I think we then talked
The
about
participant
candidate,
transparency.
right? But then we talked about the campaigns and candidates and how even though they're putting information out that they want you to hear, you should probably do your own independent research as well, because sometimes they're not giving you what you want, right? In other words, if they're talking about, I don't know, their record, all of the Girl Scout cookies they sold, their time in the clubhouse, right? That's all well and good. And we want to hear that perhaps, but we also want to know what they plan to do when they get elected. We all are going to have different priorities. Some things are going to matter more to us than others, right? And that's fine. But I think we should be looking at that, right? If policy matters to us, then we should be doing our own research on policy, especially when we see the media not really giving it to us to that degree. So similar could be said with the AI discussion, I think, right? Like even when we Google things now, sometimes they're giving us AI, which may not be right or may not be the information that we need at that time. So maybe the bottom line here is do your own independent research. Don't trust what you hear. You know what I mean? And that's hard. That's increasingly hard in the world that we
Yeah,
live in, but it's also becoming increasingly necessary.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think we need to be more on guard
Mm.
these days with the information that's presented to us, with the imagery or the visuals that we're seeing, with the messages that are communicated to us. In these campaigns, it's not much, it's not dissimilar to marketing of a product where they're going to tell you what they think you want to hear, and omit some of the things that you might need to hear. And so it's going to be a little bit more incumbent upon us, especially when there's so many things that are able to be created quickly, and with AI and different, cult of personality and sensationalism. It's going to be a little bit more incumbent upon us to do that research ourselves, and we actually should, so that we can be the most informed.
Yes, yes. You don't want to show up to the ballot box not having ever seen those names that you're voting on before.
And it happens.
Yeah. Listen, it's happened to all of us, but I think we should all be doing more to inform ourselves.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, where can people find us?
They can find us on social media, on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram. Take part in the conversations on there. There was a nice conversation happening, or some comments on the Facebook posts. So get in on that action. YouTube specifically, subscribe to the channel, follow, leave your comments on there. Let's get the discussion going. We're on Instagram, and I believe this conversation is taking place on Reddit as well. So then of course, everywhere podcasts are available. Get in on that, subscribe, and it automatically be pushed to your device.
Yes, sounds good. As always, we've got work to do. We thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.